joining us this morning for this webinar on customer experience. This webinar is offered to you by, in collaboration with the Netherlands Business Council and the Benelux Business Council. We are joined by Marleen and Ian from the CX Masterclass, and they were going to talk about customer experience. This webinar is recorded, and we're asking all of you to be on mute. Questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. So if you have any question, please type it on the chat. And at the end, I will read those questions to our panel, Marleen and Ian. So without further ado, I'm going to leave the floor to Marleen.
Yes, thank you so much. And first of all, I would like to thank all of you for accepting this invitation to this webinar. It's really an honor to be here together with Ian. And let me start to introduce myself. So my name is Marleen van Wijk. I am located in the Netherlands. I own a company called Nexus, and it's a customer experience consultancy and training agency. And we operate mainly in the Benelux. So, and before I started Nexus, I used to work for several companies in telecom, logistics, market research, but currently I'm head of customer experience for TUI, the travel organization, on an interim base. And well, I'm not just here by myself, I'm here with my friend and colleague Ian. So Ian, floor is yours.
Thank you, Marleen, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's such a pleasure to be with you today. I'm coming live from the UK. I've been grounded in the UK since March. Usually I would be in the UAE, probably Dubai, but it's a pleasure to be with you and to be sitting here alongside Marleen. I am an independent customer experience specialist like Marleen. And I've been operating independently for the last almost 9 years, having spent 17 years prior to that in the corporate world. During my independent time, I've worked in 44 countries around the world, sharing knowledge on the subject of customer experience and helping companies in almost every industry you can imagine to understand how to become more customer-centric. And it will be a real pleasure to share some thoughts with you as to the theory of customer experience this morning. So, shall we get cracking, Marleen? What we have prepared for you this morning is a webinar of 2 parts. What I'm going to do is to give you some clarity and understanding of the fundamental theory of customer experience before I pass over to Marleen to take you through the practical application. So this is very much the what and the how, if you like. And what I want to start with is an introduction to customer experience. Now, I may validate for many of you your own understanding of what customer experience is, and validation is very important. But for others listening in today, I may give you the clarity of understanding exactly what customer experience means. And you will be given all of these slides, by the way, by the Benelux Council after this event. So let's get cracking. The first thing I would like to share with you is the evolution of customer experience itself. Marleen, if you could go to the next slide, please. Customer experience is a terminology that you may have been using or heard over the last 5 to 10 years or so. But actually, its roots go all the way back to the days of direct marketing, potentially 20 years ago, 20 to 30 years ago. And from direct marketing, customer experience evolved into CRM, customer relationship management, something I'm sure many of you were involved in, before eventually, around the turn of the decade 2010, the terminology of customer experience started to become formalized. In fact, the Customer Experience Professionals Association, an association I've been involved in from the very beginning, was only founded in 2011. So customer experience is still relatively new. As we sit here today in 2020, we've actually moved even further forward, because there is now a growing trend of talking not just about customer experience, but also experience management. And you will hear the acronym XM being used more and more going forward, because experience management encompasses not just customer experience, but also the increasing importance of the employee experience, the digital experience, and many are now talking about the human experience. So customer experience as a principle continues to evolve. But what do we actually mean by customer experience? If you could go to the next slide for me, Marleen. Customer experience as a terminology is still very confused. Everyone uses the terminology, but there is still a misunderstanding as to what it means, because there are many terminologies being used by organizations to describe the relationship with the customer. The three terms you see on the screen are the three most commonly used terms in the world today, but they're not the only ones. Some organizations talk about customer excellence, some talk about customer success. Obviously, many of you, if not all of you, are based in the Gulf region, where there is talk of customer happiness. The fact that there are so many terminologies is not a problem. The problem is when these terminologies are used interchangeably with each other, very often with leaders thinking they mean the same thing, which they don't. Customer service is not the same thing as customer experience. And in the Gulf region, there is still a blurring of understanding between those two things. Customer service is only one element of an experience that an organization delivers to its customers, in exactly the same way as sales is, as marketing is, as operations is, as everything is. Customer experience is the representation of everything an organization does that enables the customer to interact with its products and services. Every single employee in your organization has a role to play in the delivery of the experience. Now, the irony of customer experience only becoming recognized as a principle in recent times is that customer experience has always existed from the day an organization was created. And so recognizing there is an experience is important, but it doesn't mean the experience is any good. The ultimate aspiration is for an organization to become ultimately customer-centric. And to become customer-centric is not the same thing as just recognizing there is an experience itself. To become customer-centric would mean that the experience is being delivered in an environment, in a culture that enables all of your people to think and act in the interests of the customer every time they do anything. That's what it means to be customer-centric. And regrettably, around the world, many organizations are still not doing that consistently. They are thinking and acting in the interests of the organization. That being said, we do need everyone to have a clear understanding of what the experience looks like, what comprises the experience, so you're then able to improve it. We go to the next slide, please, Marleen. All experiences are made up of these three component parts: the functional, the accessible, and the emotional. The functional component of all experiences represent your products and your services. Most organizations were created to differentiate themselves on this functional component alone. The challenge in 2020 and beyond is that it's become increasingly difficult to differentiate on that functional component alone. Because unless your product or service is completely unique, you are not able to differentiate on it, because if you do it, everyone else does it. And one of the greatest examples of this is in Dubai, where prior to the pandemic, a population of approximately 3 million people, there were 54 banks in Dubai. Now, 54 banks in a population of 3 million people, when all of those banks do exactly the same thing, is not sustainable. And actually, the pandemic has just accelerated the need for that industry to consolidate, because those banks cannot differentiate between themselves. And this is one of the reasons why the accessible component, not just for banking in Dubai, but for all industries, has become ever more important. Because the accessible component represents how easy it is for your customers to be able to interact with your products and services. The easier it is, the more likely it is that your customer will come back to you. And the poster child, as I like to call them, of the accessible experience is Amazon. Because in most of the markets around the world where Amazon operate, they've made it so easy to interact with them that consumers don't bother looking anywhere else anymore. But what's fascinating about Amazon is that they sell nothing that's unique. It's not the products or services that differentiate them, it's how easy they've made it to get to those products and services. But that being said, whilst we cannot have an experience without the functional or the accessible, it is the third component that's the most important of the three, because the emotional component represents the way an experience makes your customer feel. And the way the experience makes your customer feel is what they are most likely to remember. And all customers will remember one of three things from all experiences. They'll remember very good things, they'll remember very bad things, or they will remember nothing at all. And that third outcome, remembering nothing at all, typically has been the worst of the three emotional outcomes. However, as a result of the pandemic, it's actually customers remembering their experience for the wrong reason that is significantly the worst outcome. Because emotion has been amplified as a result of the pandemic, and customers will not forget or forgive organizations that do bad things to them during this time. So with all of that being said, how do you get to the point where you're able to focus on delivering the right experience to your customer that leaves them feeling the way you want them to feel? We go to the next slide, please, Marleen. This I call the customer experience continuum. And every organization on the planet sits somewhere on this line. Regrettably, the overwhelming majority of organizations today sit on the left-hand side of this continuum, delivering what we call random or unexpected experiences. In other words, as a customer, you never quite know what's going to happen. Okay? On the right-hand side of this continuum are the most customer-centric organizations in the world. The Amazons, the Disneys, the Ritz-Carltons. These organizations are ones who don't differentiate themselves solely on their products and services. It is the entire experience that differentiates them. For an organization to get from the left-hand side to the right-hand side of this continuum, they must first get to the middle of this continuum. Because in the middle, you would be clearly defining what you want the experience to be in the first place. The only way you can differentiate on the experience is if you know what you want that experience to be first. And to get to the middle of the continuum, you would be able to focus on delivering what we call the intentional or desired experience. To get to the middle, these characteristics must be in place. There has to be a shared vision. Very often, customer experience is the brainchild of one person who tries to drag everyone else with them, kicking and screaming. This needs to be a collective view of an organization. People need to be given the ability to think. Now, unfortunately, people have spent most of their careers doing what they're told. Giving them the ability to think is easier said than done. If people are given the ability to think, they will be more accountable when things go wrong. We also need to measure what we do differently. We cannot just focus on internal metrics, KPIs. We must balance that with a measurable understanding of what the customer wants and a measurable understanding of what the employee wants. But the most important thing of all, to be able to achieve this transformation, it can only be done with good cross-functional governance. Everyone has to work together to deliver the experience together, which means we must break down organizational silos to enable us to become a customer-centric organization. So for this to happen, what needs to be in place? If you could go on to the next slide for me, Marleen. For us to be able to transition to a customer-centric organization, it can only be done, and I mean that sincerely, only be done with structure and rigor. Marleen and I are advocates of the adoption of a customer experience framework. If you go to the next slide, please. Customer experience is a discipline that I now refer to as a science. And if you do not have a structured approach to applying the science, your ability to focus on it in the long term is going to be extremely difficult. It's not sustainable. However, while I call it a science, it is not an exact science. If you go to the next slide, there is no one way of creating a customer experience framework. There are many frameworks that exist. The fact that there are so many is representative of the fact that many organizations are now using them because they recognize that they need a framework to sustain the focus. What I want to share with you is a framework that I created 9 years ago, that Marleen and her colleague Guyana have adapted, that we use to share knowledge with people all around the world. If you go to the next slide, please, Marleen. And this is what the framework looks like. And I want to stress before I just quickly explain it, that this framework is intentionally simple. When we talk about structure and rigor, we do not mean complexity. As you can see, the framework has 3 parts to it: strategy, measurement, and people. The strategy part of the framework is essentially all about having clarity of understanding who your customers are, what you want their experience to be, and the role that every single employee plays in delivering that experience to the customer. The measurement part of the framework we refer to as the facts, because customer experience is a fact-based methodology. This is where the customer journey comes in, because it is the customer journey, whether an organization knows it or not, that is bringing the experience to life for the customer. And we need to be able to determine how capable that journey is at bringing the experience to life. We need to visualize the journey, measure the journey, so we can then identify the small number of priorities having the greatest detrimental effect on customer perception and financial performance. And when we know what the priorities are, we then need to fix them. But the third part of the framework is as important as the other 2, because the third part of the framework is all about people, because we can't do any of this without people. And this people part of the framework is concerned with the creation of the culture, the environment that enables people to think and act in the interests of the customer every time they do anything. So you need to ask yourselves, do you have this kind of structure in place? Do you have this kind of rigor? How can you get this kind of rigor? And to explain how you can do this, I'm going to pass over to Marleen.
Thank you so much, Ian, for explaining us the theory and, of course, the framework behind customer experience. And I can only say and confirm from working with this framework that's very helpful. And also, I used it in banking. I used it in the travel industry. And it doesn't really matter for what company you work or in what industry you work. It seems to work anytime. So I'm really, really glad that we have this structure in place. And I can imagine that listening to this webinar so far, you might think, this is getting interesting. Customer experience might be something that can be good for my company. So, but then it's nice to have a structure and a framework, but where do you start? So how do you start with customer experience? And in the next part of this presentation, Ian already mentioned, it's not about the what, but about the how. And I will give you some advice on where to start. Some simple examples and tips and tricks that might help you. And feel free to ask questions, of course, at the end. So next slide, please. So my first advice would be, before you even start to use the framework, to start to do a maturity scan. So with that, I mean a customer experience maturity assessment. And the goal of this assessment would be to determine exactly where you are as an organization in every single step of the framework. So strategy, measurement, and culture. Why should we do that? Well, you need to know where you're coming from. You need to have like a zero measurement in order also to define your ambition and your goals for the future. So I would advise you, and this is just an example that I normally use, to have a scale of maturity. And here you see, for instance, on the left side, no focus, going all the way to the right side, leading companies and game changers like Ian mentioned, for instance, Amazon. And first determine where exactly you are. And I think in the Benelux, most companies are in development or maybe in early mature stage, depending on what sort of company it is. The bigger the company, often it's less developed here. So you can do the scan by yourself or let someone help you, of course, but make sure that when you've done this scan, you will repeat it, for instance, 1 year later. So you will do a one measurement as well to see how you are progressing in this area. Well, there are some examples of the phases that you can use. For instance, the orientation phase. We made a split between desk and field research. In the desk research part, just figure out what is said about the customer in all the documents in your organization. So maybe in your business strategy, or maybe you already have a customer strategy in place. Just find out what is exactly said about the customer, about what your goals are. Secondly, field research, very, very important. So speak to variety of stakeholders in your organization. So maybe on board level, on all levels in the organization, and figure out what their point of view is on customer experience. And also how they think you as a company are delivering the customer journey. What I normally also do is include what the customers are saying. So it could also be wise to interview some customers, or maybe if you're already measuring customer feedback, dive into that particular feedback. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. Here's an example of what this could look like. So on the left side, you will see the three components of the framework. So strategy, measurement, and culture. And this is a very simple way of showing where you are. So you will see, for instance, the first part is strategy, and customer strategy is one of the items there. Now, for this particular company, there's no customer strategy in place yet. So this will definitely help you to see where to start and where to focus when you're going to approach when you're going to start with your customer experience journey. So we will share this slide so you can use this, of course, later, but you will see that all elements of the framework are in here. Please go to the next slide. Thank you. What you can also add to your maturity scan is an assessment of the current CX knowledge level. Like Ian mentioned in the beginning, it's very important that we all have the same view on the definitions of CX. And we need to speak the same language. So what we advise you to do is think about maybe organizing training, or not only for customer professionals, but also for leadership. And what you can also do is learn yourself, of course, do self-study. And maybe you can also think of becoming CCXP. That's the qualification. It's a global qualification, certified customer experience professional. And I think for me personally, this was really, really helpful. And Ian and myself, we are big fans of this qualification. And globally, I think there are around maybe 1,000, but maybe Ian knows better, only 1,000 people that own that qualification. So
around 1,100 now, Marleen.
Oh, well, it's growing. There's so many more people that want to join and want to do this.
We still need a lot more.
Yeah, we need a lot more, especially worldwide. But it's really, it's not an easy test, but there are, we of course can help you, or it's very good to be in the community, because now we all speak the same language. So like in your organization, also globally, we're talking about the same things. Can we go to the next slide? Thank you. So this is already the last slide. There will be 5 top tips on it. So we don't want to send you away without providing you with 5 top tips on where to start. So the first one would be, sorry, I can't see the screen. I have to make it a little bit bigger. Yes. When you're starting CX, make sure you understand and you realize that this is not something that you are going to do for just like a project or a program. There is no end to CX. It's a decision that you are going to become customer centric, like Ian said in the beginning. So it is an infinite way of running your organization. So keep that in mind, because a lot of companies that we visit say, oh, we're going to do a CX project, and when is the final date? What are the milestones? No, it's really a state of mind. It's a decision that you make as a company. And Ian also mentioned this already a while back, but this is not something that you can do just by yourself. So outstanding customer experiences are not realized by individuals. It's realized by a team of people that are all part of delivering a customer journey. So very important to realize, because when you realize that, you also realize that you need to involve people from the beginning, so from the early stages. And that is not just board level, that's everyone. So communication is also key in successful CX transformations. The third top tip would be executive buy-in. Yes, you need everyone in the organization, but without the approval, the commitment, the buy-in of the executives, this is not going to work. And you can maybe start without them, but at the end, they are the ones that they should be an example for the rest of the organization. So make sure your executives or your board level is included, and convince them about the fact that this is going to be important. Number 4, do not assume, act upon facts. Yeah, I always, when I enter organizations, I always see a lot of very intelligent professional people, but everyone is always assuming what the customer wants. And this has to do with experience, of course, but really make sure that you always check and measure customer feedback, because customer behavior and customer needs change all the time, especially now with COVID. So make sure that at all times you will ask customers for new feedback. Never assume, always check. Also, for instance, when changing customer journeys, building projects, make sure you co-create, validate, and have them included. At the end, it's about the customers. And last but not least, you cannot rush a transformation. CX is a cultural transformation because everyone is involved in the organization. So normally these types of transformations take like 6 to 8 years. So to go from no focus to the right side of the maturity scale, it can at least sometimes even more, 6 to 8 years, really a long time. And when you have new leadership or things like COVID, it can even take longer. So keep that in mind. But it's fun. It's a fun journey. And Ian, maybe you can confirm, but when you use the framework, and I've experienced that last year as well for a bank, you can really progress. You can make sure that the 6 to 8 years is shorter. And well, it's such a beautiful journey. So I would invite all of you to start working on your CX transformations. And well, Ian, maybe you want to add something to that.
Well, just to add to what you've said, you know, organizations in all industries around the world have radically overcomplicated what they do. And we are bogged down with complexity and bureaucracy that prevents employees from being able to think and act in the interests of customers. Too often employees are just focused on performing tasks, but they perform those tasks, as I say, without thinking. When we talk about this importance of adopting a framework, we're not talking about bureaucracy, we're talking about discipline. And discipline is what many organizations have lost. They've lost the structure that gives them the ability to focus on doing less, but doing less well. And that is why we need to bring discipline back in. My background is ultimately, as you know, Marleen, in process improvement.
Yeah.
But business process management discipline has disappeared from too many organizations. And so we're in a world where not only is there an amplified effect of emotion because of COVID, there's a lot of panic, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of uncertainty, but we've got that panic and uncertainty in an overly complex bureaucratic environment. It is not a good combination. And what this framework approach will do is give you the ability to see the wood for the trees, get out of the detail, and have that structured approach to consistently improving the experience.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think if you add the maturity scan to it, you will have also a clear ambition. And you can also deliver all the milestones and to inform your communication. You can use them to communicate. So I think the combination is really helped me in the past for a couple of organizations. So, well, I think, Ian, can we go to the next slide, please? Yes, so that went quicker than we thought, Ian, but that leaves us with more time for the Q&A.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hi, well, thank you so much both. It was so interesting. Thank you, Marleen and Ian. So I think we have one question, but please, to all our listeners, feel free to ask your questions now. So the question we have is, how did the pandemic impact the need for companies to have a customer-centric approach?
Do you want me to go first, Marleen?
Feel free.
Okay, so it's a very good question because the pandemic has, without question, changed the way organizations needed to interact with their customers. As I've just said, the greatest problem right now is the fact that we're going through a radical and very quick period of change. And that change has led to emotions going through an even more radical change. At the very beginning of the pandemic, in February, March time, the instant reaction of every human, so employees and customers, was to go into a panic, a state of panic, a state of fear that then actually started to evolve into anger, frustration, irritation. It then moved on to uncertainty. And the problem is that now we know that there is no end to this, or it appears as though there is no end to this. People are still at the bottom of that you may be aware of the Kotter change curve. This is I'm almost describing the Kotter change curve. People are still in this very uncertain state of mind. And as a result, we must make sure that we are finding a way of giving people hope, letting people see that there is light at the end of the tunnel. And that means that there has been a greater need for organizations to empathize with both their employees and their customers. Because people are so uncertain that if we stick to our standard rules and regulations, it is only going to make our people and our customers feel worse. And so what organizations have needed to do during the pandemic is the right thing. Now, this is something that many organizations have never really wanted to do. And what I mean by the right thing is that they've needed to say, do you know what? We've got to listen and empathize. If that means we have to defer payments, so customers can pay over a longer period of time, that's the right thing to do. If we've got to give our customers certain things for free, maybe that's the right thing to do. It's all about doing the right thing. But just one final thing I'll say before I shut up, is that more importantly than this, the pandemic has led to organizations needing to understand the importance of doing the right thing for their own employees. The most customer-centric organizations in the world have always believed that the way you treat your people is the way your people will treat your customers. And actually, right now, more than ever before, you shouldn't be thinking customer first. You should be thinking employee first, because employees have been sent home to work. Many of them don't know if they're going to keep their jobs, but even sending them home, we are just assuming that they have a good environment to work from at home. Many employees don't have a desk. There are employees working on their beds. They don't necessarily have good Wi-Fi. They feel isolated, alone. They're missing human interaction. All of this has been ignored to a degree by many organizations. So it's really, really important that you focus on the employee experience if you have any chance of being able to sustain the focus with the customer.
Yes.
Thank you so much. We have two other questions, and according to you and your experience, in which sector or industry is a customer experience a journey a must?
Well, that's an easy one, I think, for me, because I would say everywhere. And I think because if you want to deliver an outstanding customer experience, this is always key. It's always key to understand where your customer, how the journey of your customers in your organization. And let's make it clear, I don't advise anyone to just map customer journeys to map customer journeys, I would say there's a reason to do so. A customer journey is mapped only because you want to know how good you are in delivering that journey. So again, it's very important to have customer feedback and to measure how good you are in delivering it. And that's the only reason for me why we're currently mapping the customer journeys, to have more insight and to be able to make the next step, to improve, for instance, the pain points that we discover, and also to see where we're good at, like Ian said, to also tell our employees, this is where we're really good at. And so it has two advantages. So I would say any sector, any industry would benefit from understanding the customer experience.
Okay. So since we, physical meetings with customers are basically non-existent now, what models do you recommend to engage with the customers?
Yeah, so thank you, Frank, for sending that question in. It is undoubtedly tough to continue engaging with customers without being able to physically meet them. However, that is the way of the world now, and I suspect it will be that way for many months to come. And I'm not sure I can quote any specific model, but what I will say is that one of the things that we need to be doing more now than ever before is listening to our customers. And my suggestion is always to ask them, what is the most effective way now to continue communicating with them? One of the things that really frustrated me, and it's quite easy to frustrate me, by the way, at the very beginning of this pandemic, is that I have never in my life received so many emails from CEOs. You know, every company's CEO emailed us telling us how wonderfully important we are to them. Why did it take a pandemic for a CEO to decide that they can now email me? You know, it was so insincere in the way it was done. And I think we need to be real with this. You know, this is the way it is. Everyone is staring at a screen for 7 to 8 hours every single day. You know, how do they want us to engage? Do they want us to just send them regular communication by email? Do they want to actually speak to us rather than, have to do a Zoom meeting? Let's ask them and find out the best way for them. What is important is that you have a clear message to give them that allows them to understand the direction that you're going in, and that you are there to continue supporting them and to do the right thing for them. That would be my advice.
Well, we have another question. What is your advice to deal with cultural diversity in companies?
I knew Valevine would ask a question.
Me too, but it's good to see you again, Valevine. Ian, would you like to answer this one?
Well, as Valevine knows very well, and as we all know, especially those of you operating in the Gulf region, cultural diversity is a real challenge, because I'm very, very fortunate that I work on every continent. And despite the pandemic, I'm still working on every continent, apart from Antarctica, that is, which I don't think will change anytime soon. And, the problem we have is that depending on where you come from, the way you interact with others is different. The way employees interact from the Far East is very different to the way employees interact from Southeast Asia, for example. And so if you are working in a very culturally diverse environment, the vitally important thing is that every employee understands the role they play in delivering the experience. I said when I talked about the continuum that most employees do what they're told. And actually many cultures, especially cultures that you are working with in the Middle East, are incredibly submissive. You know, they just want to be told what to do. And the problem is that if they just want to be told what to do, they don't think. They just do what they've been told. And so you've got to work very hard to give them an understanding that actually they are able to think, because there will be an inbuilt fear of thinking. You know, they won't want to think because they're scared of, well, what happens if I don't do it right? And so you've got to give them the ability to think. And there is a specific tool that we teach called an employee hero that is a way of engaging employees to understand the role they play, but they must define it themselves. If you want people to think, you've got to let them define for themselves what they should be doing every day to deliver the experience you want your customers to have. But to do that, you've got to have confidence and belief in your people. You know, again, I've seen many situations in the Middle East where, no, we can't possibly let our people think. Well, if you don't let them think, then nothing's going to change. You've got to believe in them, but you've got to let them tell you. And, you know, you'll be surprised. It doesn't matter where people are from. If you let them have that belief that, do you know what, I do matter, I do have a role to play, it can be very powerful.
Thank you. So we have maybe our last question from Steve. So we're all familiar with the questionnaire and the feedback for customers, but what other tools would you suggest to get different feedback from our customers?
Yes, that's actually my favorite topic, Steve. So measurement. So thank you for this question. There's so many ways to measure customer feedback. And of course, questionnaires is just one way. You can do questionnaires by telephone, online. There are so many options there. But don't forget about just things that you can get, for instance, from your complaints department, or you can get information also on social media. There's so many sources where you can get valuable information from. So I think it's, and that's also maybe an extra advice, but and also part of the maturity scan. Make sure that you understand what your measurement house currently looks like in order to be able to make changes and to add maybe extra sources to it. So this is like, this is a topic I can talk for hours about, but there, make sure it's just that it's not only the questionnaire you're asking questions. And what also is very popular, by the way, is what we like to call the customer room. Now it's a little bit become more difficult because normally it is a physical location, but it's a place, a lab, or where employees can meet up with customers and ask them questions. So more qualitative research. It's a little bit tough now because of COVID, but I also see some new developments there to take the customer room more to an online environment. So, but always happy to tell more, but I think otherwise I will talk for hours about this topic.
Well, one more question. Yeah, I think we could send you the presentation by email. There's no problem with that. Well, I think we have covered it. Thank you so much both for your time and waking up so early.
You're welcome.
And you know, I want to also thank the Netherlands Business Council for partnering with us for this webinar. And I think, do you want the last word, or are we good?
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you both. Thank you, Ria, too. And I wish you a wonderful day.
Yeah, thank you, Anne.
And everyone.
Yes, and hopefully we see each other soon.
Hopefully, you know, face to face.
Face to face, yes. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.